Thank you, Whit. That was Whit Locke sharing with us this morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Columbus, an inclusive religious community of people supporting each other in the search for truth and meaning. I'm Rick Spradlin, your service leader. The chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. It speaks to us of reason, tolerance, and freedom, but also of compassion, respect, and love. May its flame ever warm and illuminate our lives. One of the ways we proclaim the vitality of our fellowship is through sharing brief and personal joys and concerns. I'll start by lighting a candle for unspoken fears or concerns that you may be feeling these days. Kathy Rankin's son and daughter-in-law tested positive for coronavirus, but they seem to be responding well to medication and doing better than expected. So please keep Kathy and her family in your thoughts and prayers. And next, Nick Wooten's cousin died in an apartment fire in Arizona. Her heroics and the bravery of two bystanders saved the lives of her young children. If you go to our UU Facebook group, you can find a GoFundMe page there, or a link to a GoFundMe page to help with costs for hospitalization and other costs. So let's keep Nick and his family in our thoughts and prayers. And last, personally, I'd like to thank everyone for their outpouring of support. My uncle died this past week. It was his heart. It wasn't coronavirus related. But my brother and my first cousin also tested positive, but they're doing well as well. My brother is asymptomatic, and my cousin was having tightness of breath and difficulty, but she's doing much better now. So thank you for that. If you have any other joys and concerns that you would like to be shared, please email them to our president, Hal Majette, or to our office administrator, Brenda Stevens, at uufcga@gmail.com. And now let us once again affirm the 7 principles which sum up the core values that Unitarian Universalist congregations support and promote. Number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Number 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. 3, the acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. 4, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. 5, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. 6, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. And now for our celebration of life toast. If you have something to drink already, you can use that or toast with me in spirit. We celebrate life. We celebrate life with its beauty and its pain. We lift these cups in tribute to the achievements of human minds and hands, and in sensitivity to the frustrations of misfortune and heartache. Not fixing blame or credit for the outcome of chance, sensing the risk, savoring the joy, sharing it all. Knowing of the certainty of death and remembering the value of each moment, we drink our toast of celebration to this time, to the future, to each other. to the throbbing of the earth and sea and sky with life. Together, we drink this toast in celebration of life. And now for our offering. If you would like to contribute, you can mail your offering to UU Fellowship of Columbus, Box 698, Forston, Georgia, 31808. We have a PayPal account set up as well. Thank you, Whit. That was beautiful. Is dissent patriotic? It's been said that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. That's a quote that's often attributed to Thomas Jefferson, although it's never actually been found in any of his writings, and it seems unlikely that he would actually say that. The earliest usage of the phrase may have been in a 1961 publication, The Use of Force in International Affairs. And there it is written, "If what your country is doing seems to you practically and morally wrong, is dissent the highest form of patriotism?" It was used in a speech by New York City Mayor John Lindsay at Columbia University, as reported in the New York Times, October 16, 1969. He said, We cannot rest content with a charge from Washington that this peaceful protest is unpatriotic. The fact is that this dissent is the highest form of patriotism. Both times this was used, it referred to protests against the Vietnam War. The historian Howard Zinn used it again on July 3rd, 2002, when he was asked to comment on how dissent had come to be labeled unpatriotic by the Bush administration. He replied, "While some people think that dissent is unpatriotic, I would argue that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. In fact, if patriotism means being true to the principles for which your country is supposed to stand, then certainly the right to dissent is one of those principles. And if we're exercising that right to dissent, it's a patriotic act." Zinn had written a similar phrase a few years earlier in Declarations of Independence, Cross-Examining American Ideology, published in 1991, and there he wrote, "If patriotism were defined not as blind obedience to government, nor as submissive worship to flags and anthems, but rather as love to one's country, one's fellow citizens, as loyalty to the principles of justice and democracy, then patriotism would require us to disobey our government when it violated those principles." Of course, dissent can be patriotic, but I don't think you would say it's inherently so. It would depend on whether the spirit of that dissent aligns itself with the principles of our republic. When Colin Kaepernick decided to take a knee during the pregame national anthem, it was an act of dissent meant to draw attention to police violence. The spirit of his dissent was one of law enforcement as it relates to civil rights of minorities, a general welfare and civil liberty argument. The purpose of his protest the opposition to his protest framed their argument as one of object worship. They consider reverence for the flag, a symbol of our American ideals, to itself be an American ideal. When armed protesters entered the Capitol building in Michigan to protest their governor's coronavirus crackdown, some were questioning the power of the state government to lock down a state economy, while others were simply accusing the governor of a political stunt to harm a president they support. Now, the federal and state governments do have the legal authority to quarantine and restrict commerce for health reasons. It's a law whose principle can be summarized by the amorphism, "Your right to swing your arm ends at someone else's nose." You have the right to walk about freely and conduct business unless doing so endangers the life and liberty of others. That's the law. So the protesters were demonstrating against an established law. Is that patriotic? Now, before you answer, remember that we Unitarians and Universalists have a long and proud history of dissent against established laws that we felt were unjust, laws that we felt went against the governing principles of our faith. We were against slavery when that was the law of the land. We were against the prohibition of women from voting when that was the law. We were against the Jim Crow laws, the segregation laws. Were we patriotic? Well, let's take a little time to consider the definitions. The word dissent means the expression or holding of opinions that are different from those commonly or officially held. Now, patriotism can simply be defined as love for one's country. Now, I like the quote from Theodore Roosevelt when he said, "Patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president or any other public official, save exactly to the degree in which he himself stands for the country." And personally, I would have to add that patriotism means a love for the principles and ideals of a country, especially when it comes to America, a country founded on ideals. No president that actually won the popular vote has ever asked for an oath of personal loyalty rather than an oath of loyalty to the principles of the United States. This is in direct contradiction to to the dictators of today and the monarchs of days gone by, where the leader himself was the symbol of the country. So any judgment call on dissent is a tricky one. It's easy to say that history will be the judge, but history can be as biased as the present. To this day, the civil disobedience of the Sons of Liberty can be viewed as patriotic from the American point of view and unpatriotic from the English point of view. The Boston Tea Party dumped 340 crates of tea into the Boston Harbor. Now, in today's currency, that was worth a little over $2 million. Now, that's $2 million of private property. See, the ships they attacked, the Beaver, the Dartmouth, and the Eleanor, they were owned by Americans, privately owned by Americans. And the tea, well, that belonged to the East India Company. It was not owned by the English crown. Now, to the Tories, the colonists who felt loyal to England, this act of dissent was further proof that those wanting independence were more interested in mob rule than law and order. Most American patriots, especially George Washington, he denounced acts of lawlessness and violence, especially against private property, because it distracted from their cause and gave the opposition the opportunity to paint the independent movement as anarchists. Sound familiar? Okay. A large popular movement takes up a cause, rallies, raises their voices in dissent, and a smaller faction of that same movement commits acts of violence, and the opposing side uses their behavior to frame the narrative to discredit the movement as a whole. Now, whether or not dissent is patriotic is a decision that has to be made on an individual basis. But we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can recognize and defend the right of dissent as patriotic, even if we disagree with the views of the protesters. I'll close with a quote from Evelyn Beatrice Hall, English biographer and author of The Life of Voltaire and Friends of Voltaire, who summarized Voltaire's views by saying, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Thank you for listening. And now, before we extinguish the chalice, I hope that each and every one of you stay safe and healthy, and remember that dark times like these never last. Please join us next week, and I'll be presenting again, and my topic will be solitary and solidarity, balancing the needs of the individual with the needs of society. So, we extinguish the chalice here that it might glow gently in our hearts as we leave this place. And now for our closing words. With unity of spirit, we go our ways in universal fellowship until we meet again. Now, Whit will close us out with Lift Every Voice and Sing. So long.